Ash moves let gray snow across a ledge of broken basalt, and heat-stunned beetles tumble into a drop that swallows sound. A rhino blunders toward the void, pupils milked to opal, nostrils pulling panic. The ground shakes twice, once for the cliff's echo, once for the matriarch behind him. Her shoulder strikes his ribs at an angle learned from storms, not fights, and their bodies shear away from death. Sparks rake hide, hair singes, and the world shrinks to breathing and a low, constant hum of wire far downslope. She steadies, trunk mapping his face like a blind person reading rain. He quivers, listing. The firefront coughs embers, then turns as if thinking. The elephant chooses left, away from wind. The rhino follows the gravity of her mass, finding balance inside her wake. Above them, vultures circle, confused by everything still alive. Before the ledge and the fire, light fractured like broken glass. A dust devil tore alkaline crust from a dried pan and flung it into the rhino's eyes. Not a clean wound, but grinding, micro-tears salted by wind. He tried to scrape relief against termite mounds. The pain turned his world to white. Predators read pain the way trackers read maps. Hyenas tuned in first, curious. The matriarch watched from the ridge, ears sculpting wind, remembering calves that wandered and never answered. She descended slowly, not to save him, but to study the disaster at its source. He stepped sideways, crashed into acacia, bled a little, kept moving toward a smell that meant water in old seasons. The earth was a table of lies. Every depression promised, every promise was dry. A single set of heavy tracks began to bracket his own, choosing patience over distance. Night took color, but gifted geometry. Crickets stitched a perimeter. Frogs were missing, which meant the riverbed ahead still slept in stone. The rhino leaned on sound, catching the elephant's steps as metronome. Her footfalls wrote a score, with rests where roots intruded and accents where soil loosened. She exhaled basil and ash. He learned to follow scent like a tether. A reed buck bolted. Silence reset. The matriarch tried a test, stopped, waited, shifted weight. He stopped. She moved. He matched. Their radius tightened until skin-to-skin contact felt like a shoreline. She tapped the earth, shallow drum, to warn of holes. He curved, memorizing the code. Above them, lightning scratched the horizon without rain. Far off, metal thudded, 1, 2, 3, like a fence trembling under weight. The hum in the ground returned, faint but deliberate. Their route bent toward a corridor the map in her bones mistrusted. Their first collision was not a miracle, just physics. He cut across the matriarch's line, head low, horn ready against an imagined rival. She did not yield. Bone met hide, a thud that pulled stars closer. He reeled. She held her ground until the tremor in his legs settled. Then the trunk descended, air tasting his fear. She brushed dust from the ravaged eyes, not to heal, but to locate edges. He tolerated the intrusion as a cliff tolerates rain. When she moved away, he tried to pass again, flinching from shadows that did not exist. She blocked, patient as drought. The second time she nudged, it repositioned, not punished. Heat fell, night lifted. The ground announced a dry river by the sudden smoothness of clay. Termite chimneys lined the bank like organs. The matriarch slowed, listening for breath that didn't belong to them.
By the third hour, hyenas understood the rhythm. Blind bull, guardian mass. They ghosted the margins, laughing softly at intervals as if taking attendance. The matriarch widened her profile, ribs flaring with each inhale to look larger than hunger. She rumbled low, a frequency more felt than heard, syncing the rhino's pace to her own. He stumbled, recovered, began to drift toward a scent ribbon that signaled stagnant water and trapped hooves. She checked him with a pressure that said turn, without pretending to speak. A lion coughed in the blue dark. The hyenas fell silent. A fourth thing arrived, the mosquito whine of a drone or a beetle against anxiety. The hum in the dirt grew clearer. Metal carries intention. The matriarch angled away from open ground, steering into thorn corridors where only memory fits. The predators kept parallel, awaiting geometry to break them a meal. The riverbed offered tracks like scripture: buffalo, zebra, kudu, and the ghost prints of human boots. The clay's smoothness begged for hooves, but its top layer gave way to pockets that grabbed ankles and stories. The rhino's forefoot sunk, suctioned, and for a blink he remembered water that carried weight rather than theft. He pressed forward. The matriarch felt the angle of his shoulder change and cut in, flanking to redistribute momentum. A crocodile lay stranded in a deep pothole, more ancient than hope, lid slit open to measure futures. The rhino's scent brushed it. The beast twitched, unable to commit to a strike. Overhead, a fish eagle screamed at a river that did not answer. The matriarch beat dust onto the rhino's eyes with wet mud, instinct pretending at medicine. Steam rose. The blind bull stilled, receiving the cool as if it were a verdict. Morning found a breeze that carried the taste of pharmacy, petrichor without rain, clay without mercy. The matriarch angled into it, trunk sampling. The rhino's eyes, filmed and furious, were not failing from age but from abrasion and chemical burn. Alkaline dust ground into cornea, salt sealing damage. Not permanent, not yet. With time, clean water and shade, some clarity could return like shards of the broken mirror fitted carefully. The matriarch could not know prognosis, but her body remembered mud poultice, remembered shade under granite boulders where the air cooled by pretending to be stone. She pressed him that way, exchanging distance for healing. Predators melted to the periphery, bored by patience. The hum in the earth moved closer, pulsing in a heartbeat that was not theirs. Metal again, wire again. A corridor's geometry testing life against right angles. Boot prints deepened where the riverbed narrowed, fresh edges soft, heel scuffs pointing south. A plastic bottle rolled against a reed and confessed its origin. The matriarch paused, scent fan wide. Humans had been here last night or this morning, and the breeze forgot to lie. The rhino lowered his head, testing ground with horn like a blind man's cane. The sound of wire sang through soil, fence or snare field, a clumsy web strung where animals think. The matriarch did not fear humans as predators. She feared their ideas. She steered them into scrub where thorns permissioned only small bodies. Her tusk chipped against a buried metal hook. Old scar tissue flared with memory, and she shifted her stride to protect it. The rhino accelerated by accident, spooked by a Franklin burst. She shouldered him back, a moving wall until the panic found a place to dissolve.
Scar tissue writes louder than fresh pain. A line around the rhino's foreleg, shiny, hairless, stubborn, whispered snare. Months ago, perhaps years, wire had kissed bone and tried to keep it. He carried that lesson across seasons, an oath against thin, singing lines. Now, as the ground's hum clarified into the fence's cruel lullaby, the scar brightened in his nervous system like a lighthouse with bad news. He veered. The matriarch matched, refusing to let his path intersect memory. A jackal trotted alongside, bored and hopeful. The air warmed. Mirage painted water where none waited. The rhino's thirst turned every breath into sand. He cut toward glinting light and hit a tangle of devil's thorn that tugged hide and patience.
The matriarch pulled him free by body, not tool, and in the struggle, their sweat minted a new smell, determination with edges. The basin ahead glittered like a promise and failed like one. At its center lay a shallow lens of water the size of a table, ringed by churned clay and the prints of last night's desperation. Every species had argued here with their feet. The rhino stepped in, drank metallic warmth, and flinched as alkali needled the wounds in his eyes. He jerked back, blind fury momentarily louder than fear. The matriarch stood between him and departure, forcing a slower hunger. She scooped mud with the edge of her foot and layered it across his brow until the heat softened. On the far rim, a camera trap blinked a red eyelash, witnessing. 3 gunshots cracked from the ridge, measured, spaced, not hunting, not celebration. The planes flinched. The matriarch held position until the echoes dissolved into birds again. The rhino's breathing found her cadence like a life raft.
Predators do arithmetic better than mercy. 2 hyenas tested wind and distance, using termite mounds as cover, tracing the pair's blind spots. The matriarch pivoted to keep both in front, turning the rhino with her mass like a gate swinging on invisible hinges. He snorted, horns sketching ellipses of warding that barely mattered to animals without shame. A 3rd hyena appeared, bored with patience, and tried to feint at the ankle. The rhino's hoof struck earth beside its head with the finality of a gavel. Dust flowed. The hyenas reevaluated. Over them, a thin drone finally revealed itself as locusts, a swarm rehearsing hunger without choosing a stage. The sun climbed. Heat gusted from the ground in breaths. The matriarch located a corridor of shade and delivered him to it by inches, denying the predator's geometry that could be solved. Even guardians miscalculate. A breeze carried lion musk, old but authoritative, and the rhino's nervous system detonated into motion. He surged, almost trampling the matriarch as he fled contact with the smell of yesterday's deaths. She pivoted, took the impact on shoulder and tusk, and let his momentum slide across her like water over boulder. A thorn branch raked his flank, blood printed 4 leaves, and the underside of fear. He ran into a nest of weavers that exploded yellow and noise. The world narrowed. The cliff from the cold open rehearsed itself in miniature along a ravine. She cut him off, pressed him sideways, forced a halt with weight and an authority earned in storms. For a minute that lasted too long, breathing sounded like a herd, though they were only 2. The panic drained, leaving tremors that taught humility to dirt.
Shade gathered under a granite overhang where the air pretended to be water. The matriarch dug a shallow, found a cool seam, and turned earth to paste. The rhino submitted to treatment as exhaustion impersonated surrender. Mud-patterned brow, lids, and sockets, sealing dust out, inviting breath back in. Each application slowed the metronome of pain. Flies retreated. A gecko stalked the tiny world at their feet as if it were a continent. The matriarch drank slow mouthfuls from a seep, then sprayed a mist that landed as mercy on both of them. For a small hour, time agreed to be kind. The hum of wire dulled but did not disappear. The smell of rain approached and hesitated. The rhino slept standing, chin low, horn carving an outline of resilience against the stone. Under his skin, the old snare scar ticked like a trapped clock. Night pressed its ear to the overhang and listened. Hyenas giggled from 3 directions, lions conversed without hurry, and jackals stitched punctuation across the margins. The matriarch expanded herself, ears wide, ribcage raftered to look like architecture no predator could topple. She placed one foot against the rhino's foreleg, a contact that meant stay without ceremony. Stars sharpened. The breeze changed lanes. Something else moved, large, deliberate, and metallic in scent. The earth translated it as vehicle long before eyes could. Headlights would arrive late, sound and smell came on time. The matriarch made a choice: leave the overhang and move into open ground, where humans can see, where bullets are instructions rather than endings. She rumbled, asked his body to listen. He obeyed the vibration, stepping into starlight where skin becomes a map of old choices and new gambles.
Dawn smeared copper across thorn crowns. The path to Acacia Ridge rose in a series of ledges that once discouraged calves and now would test compromised sight. The matriarch went first, then returned, then went again, teaching by repetition. The rhino learned to translate slope through the angle of her spine as it cut the horizon. At the ridge's saddle, wind accelerated, carrying the smell of baked wire and dried blood. A snare line somewhere east had cradled and murdered last week. The hyena scat told that story in hair fragments and hoof chips. The matriarch pressed west, using rock ribs as handrails. Below them, a herd of impala froze into sculptures. Above them, a storm line proposed itself with distant light. Gravity helped the descent, habitat did not. The hum through earth upgraded to a growl, as if the fence had learned to resent breathing. What looked like leadership was also following. The matriarch's chosen vector angled not only for water, but for mineral. A hidden lick trapped between copies, a seam of salts that dresses bones from the inside. The blind rhino's body wanted it without language. A calf's faint cry, far off and swallowed by hills, threaded the world. The rhino stopped, head turned, nostrils flaring for a life he could not locate. He had sired nothing here that memory respected, but kinship travels in molecules. The matriarch's path, as old as her first calf, served 2 hungers at once, his healing and her herd's chemistry. The cry repeated, maybe imagination, maybe warning. She increased pace, risking misstep. In drought, the lick is church. Arrivals negotiate priority with size. She would deliver him to what reassembles bodies. The storm front bowed closer, static building in her skin until every hair listened.
Pressure collapsed, insects vanished, the air pre-smelled of wet metal. Thunder wrote slow signatures across the eastern sky. Lightning sketched the fence line like a forensic diagram, revealing posts, braces, corner tensions, the whole cruel harp. The matriarch plotted a crossing where erosion undermined foundations. The rhino's feet found new honesty in dampening dust. Slipping risked disaster, but grip improved when the first drops agreed to be rain. She pushed him beneath the wind-gnarled acacia, then stepped into open ground to sample the electric. Her trunk lifted, hair lifted. The world held its breath. Lightning struck a far ridge. Hyenas filed away. The hum in soil quieted under rain's percussion. The fence waited, patient and dry under its minimal canopy. The matriarch returned, wet and buzzing with decision. The rhino lowered his head like a battering ram learning subtlety. The corridor advertised safety with width and delivered peril with narrowing. Posts pulled inward until their shadows touched, channeling hooves toward a gap that smelled of steel and bait. Old hair snagged along wire told a museum of desperation. Kudu velvet, zebra thread, buffalo fiber. A child's curiosity. No, goat. The matriarch stalled,
assembled a model of future outcomes, and rejected all but one. She shoved the rhino sideways into brush thick enough to argue. Thorns scored her flank. Sap perfumed the refusal. A snare loop glinted waist-high on a game trail and winked like a friend learning English. The rhino's old scar burned, instructing his muscles to step like a thief. They retreated from the funnel and arced along granite ribs where fence physics faltered. Behind them, the storm arrived fully, rain needles stitching shut the mouths of dust.
3 cracks stitched daylight, echoes layered, then thinned. The matriarch froze, reading direction, velocity, intention. Not hunting shots, not celebration. Spaced and aimed to the left of a lion's path perhaps, or above a herd drifting toward a sinkhole. The rhino flinched, but his body recognized the matriarch's stillness as instruction. He steadied. Footfalls approached. Soft, bipedal, cautious. Wind carried human salt, canvas, oil, the memory of coffee. The matriarch raised her head, made herself too large to ignore and too calm to challenge. No chase followed. The footfalls withdrew, angled toward the fence corridor, then stopped. A whistle like a bird that forgot its species riffled the air and vanished. The matriarch moved again, choosing terrain that forces humans to decide slower. Water and mineral still waited, but the landscape demanded negotiation with rules that hate grace. Crossing the ravine required engineering the body into a tool. The matriarch tested a downed thorn trunk, judged it stable enough to distribute weight across a gap that wanted hooves for breakfast. She stepped onto it, each footfall a treaty between mass and physics. The rhino hesitated, front foot on bark, back feet on distrust. The trunk flexed, creaked, accepted. Midway, a branch erupted in ants, swarming like boiling pepper. The rhino surged, threatened to zig into absence. The matriarch met him chest to chest and transferred courage through pressure. They reached the far bank. Blood from thorns patterned their hides into maps of choices that hurt and were correct. Wind softened. The storm broke apart into local weather. For 20 breaths, sky went generous. The mineral licks smell fattened, rich with everything bodies crave in drought.
At the base of the kopjes, a ranger stepped into view. Khaki, worn boots, the brim of a hat jagged from thorn arguments. He kept his hands visible, his radio low, his breathing slower than fear. The matriarch read posture before scent. He angled away from them, broadcasting, "I am steering predators, not hunting you." The earlier shots diagrammed themselves, warning rounds, deflections, nudges to keep a lion pride from collapsing into this corridor. He pointed nothing, raised nothing, said nothing. His presence moved geometry instead. The rhino's ears swiveled to the voice on the ranger's hip. Static hissed, then cleared into a plan. Open the old gate at the lick, drain the fetid pan, hold the fence line if rain surges. Intent accumulates like water. The matriarch did not bless him. She acknowledged function and continued. The ranger fell in escort distance, respectful. A calf cried again, nearer then farther, a Doppler of need. Not rhino, elephant. The matriarch's chest remembered milk as ache. Her timeline forked. Find mineral for him, find safety for a voice she might not own. She widened her radius, tried to pull both priorities into orbit. The rhino's pace improved under the promise of salt. His steps steadied, head lifted. The ranger ghosted parallel, hands empty, radio murmuring. A vulture convoy formed overhead like slow punctuation. The matriarch sampled air for lion bile, found only stories. The cry ceased, leaving afterimages in muscle. She tightened the path again, refusing to diffuse into rumor. In the gravel ahead, a metal twist lay half-buried. Wire sprung from a snare, forgotten or waiting. The rhino's old scar prickled a sentence, "Not again." He stepped wide and the ground betrayed him with a hidden loop.
The loop kissed the rhino's scar and tightened with a memory's cruelty. He surged, and the wire bit deeper, transforming flesh into alarm. The matriarch thundered forward, tusks sliding under the line, lifting, leveraging, turning her skull into a pry bar. The ranger sprinted in, knife low and open, breath sending birds to the next chapter. Rain slicked every grip. The wire refused at first, then surrendered one twist, then two, then parted with a sound like a bad idea ending. Blood ran, bright and righteous. The rhino staggered, testing limb integrity, finding enough. Pain sharpened him, narrowed his universe to the matriarch's outline. The ranger backed away, knife gone, hands visible again, a shadow arguing for better corridors. Thunder retreated into mutterings. The earth exhaled. They moved. The lick waited, like a chapel built out of necessary chemicals and faith. At the mineral seam, the problem revealed itself without grace. The lick sat behind a fence kink that funneled traffic into one human-managed aperture. Animals approached dehydrated and left injured or dead when panic and crowding turned thirst into accident. The corridor wasn't protection, it was a slow trap disguised as order. Bones lay half-hidden where grass consented. The matriarch studied the geometry and understood the violence of straight lines. The ranger radioed coordinates in a voice chiseled short. Open the emergency date. Lay brush over snare paths. Post eyes at dusk. The rhino drank, slow, eyes closed, salt irrigating wounds like a doctor with rough hands and clean water. Around them, other bodies gathered, zebra striping horizon, buffalo breathing steam, a kudu pair stepping soft. The fence hummed like a law that forgot its purpose. The matriarch raised her head and chose rebellion.
One animal tests a gate. Many animals move a landscape. The matriarch stepped to the emergency panel, old hinges furred with rust, and pushed. It groaned, refused, then considered. Buffalo joined, their shoulders converting force into policy. Zebras added noise, which is sometimes also pressure. The ranger cursed quietly, unshackled a chain, and reality offered a path that was not permissioned yesterday. The gate surrendered a meter, then two. Dust turned to mud under 1,000 intentions. Hyenas watched from the rim, adjudicating opportunity, and found none worth celebrating while everything larger synchronized. The rhino stood slightly apart, drinking mineral with the dedication of a pilgrim. He lifted his head once toward the matriarch, and the world agreed that acknowledgement can be louder than gratitude. The fence's hum softened, as if embarrassed. A line of elephants appeared distant, answering an invitation no mouth voiced. The storm closed the transaction it had been negotiating all day. Rain finally committed, hard and vertical, stitching earth to sky. Mud masks loosened and slid down the rhino's face in slow, dark currents, carrying alkali away grain by grain. He blinked. The world offered him light in shards. Not clarity, not yet, but silhouette sharpened at edges, and motion regained meaning. The matriarch stood with head high, letting water hammer her shoulders like absolution. The ranger laughed once, short and private, then got busy routing flow away from the pan so it wouldn't drown its own welcome. Predators retreated into weather logic. The fence leaked water at every wrong angle. The gate accepted rush without complaint. For the first time in days, thirst released its grip enough to let hunger speak. Bodies grazed in rain because rain turns grass into forgiveness.
By morning, the rhino could distinguish horizon from hill, mass from movement. Vision returned like a mosaic resisting final assembly. Each blink restored a tile. Pain receded to a tracer line he could manage. He tested walking without leaning into the matriarch's shoulder and did not immediately fall. The mineral seam glowed in scent and satisfied. Flies attempted a comeback. Mud answered with cool dismissals. The matriarch sampled the air for the calf's ghost and found new information. Her herd, 3 valleys over, moving toward open space as if drawn by a rope tied to hope. The ranger mapped repairs with his boots, measuring how to turn a corridor into a passage. The fence no longer hummed like tyranny, it muttered like a machine persuaded to be useful. The rhino shook his head and discovered the luxury of choosing a direction. Word travels in motion. Herds responded to the opened gate with a surge that sent signal farther than radio. Dust rose, then collapsed under rain. The corridor transformed from funnel to artery. The matriarch led a circuit through, testing stress points. Buffalo stabilized edges by being themselves. The ranger flagged snare lines with bright fabric and cut until blisters sang. In a pocket of grass, a young elephant calf, not hers, attached himself to her shadow for 30 steps, then veered back to his reality. The rhino walked the perimeter like a warden, reading the new map with horn and hoof. When he reached the place where wire had tasted him, he paused, then stepped over it clean, a sentence rewritten. The vultures circled wider, disappointed. Hyenas bored easily. The fence hummed a key closer to silence.
Machines arrived that spoke diesel and solution. Under guidance, they carved a shallow pan in a basin that would catch rain and hold it past argument. The ranger drew channels with a stick. Earth listened. The matriarch observed from shade, the rhino beside her, and the scene looked almost like cooperation without teeth. The first fill gathered. Frogs remembered their names. Dragonflies rehearsed immortality over the surface. Animals queued with a civility drought rarely allows. The emergency gate shed the adjective. A sign that only humans would read replaced warning with instruction. The corridor's geometry lost its hunger. The rhino lowered his head, mirrored the pen, and drank a future he could almost see. The matriarch rumbled approval into the ground, a frequency that travels better than applause. The valley exhaled a season's worth of unclenching in a single afternoon. No chorus promised a cure, and yet the miracle arrived, plural. The rhino's sight did not restore like a fairy tale. It sharpened to workable truth, edges, motion, midtones. The matriarch did not adopt him. She resumed her wide responsibilities, now including a pathway she helped make honest. The ranger filed a report with numbers and a subtext that said policies must fit hooves, not diagrams. Snares came up in fistfuls. The corridor breathed. Calves crossed. Predators adjusted to fairer math. Cameras recorded because stories need witnesses. The opening image, ledge, fire, deflection, rewrote itself backward through time into a blueprint for change. When bodies learn to share balance, landscapes learn to share grace. The rhino grazed within sight of the fence that became a bridge. The matriarch moved on, familiar and altered. The wild did not become kind, it became possible.